The right to protest is a fundamental right in South Africa. This right is enshrined in Section 17 of the Constitution, which says everyone has a right to assembly, to demonstrate, to picket and to present petitions. In the past few weeks, we have seen protests taking a violent turn in Tembisa, where several people were killed during a service delivery protest. In the West Rand, community members have been taking to the streets protesting against illegal miners known as Zama Zamas. Let's get an understanding of the culture of protest in South Africa. We're joined by Stanley Malematja, a human rights lawyer. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. Let's start with exactly that. Help us understand the culture of protests in South Africa.
Thank you very much for having me, and happy Women's Day to all the women. South Africa, as we know, it's categorized by its nature of protests. Protests, they date as far as the horrendous apartheid system, where we've seen the oppressed people taking to the street, to exert their rights, and to also to stand up for what they deem they are entitled to, which is their human rights. And, it has been recorded that not even a single day goes by in South Africa without a protest taking place. So it really shows how fundamental the right to protest, as enshrined in Section 17 of the Constitution, is so important and deeply rooted into the, the social fabric of the South African society. What we need to remember is that while the law does not dictate what one may protest for, it rather tells us how should we go about it when we, exercise our constitutional right to protest. And it requires that we become peaceful, and when we do protest, we must protest unarmed.
Now, as you rightfully mentioned, this is nothing new in the country, but when you look at the fact that it's 2022 and you find that people are protesting for different things, right? Security, safety, basic socio-economic needs, what should that tell us?
It should tell us that South Africa still has a lot of issues. It still has a lot of issues, and it, to a certain extent, with the number of protests that are recorded daily or recorded in a year, it also speaks to, an undeniable fact that these issues are being ignored by those who we have put into power to try and ensure that they protect our fundamental human rights. So what it actually tells us is that South Africa has a lot of issues that go unresolved, and that's why year in, year out, or day in, day out, we see people taking to the streets so that they can make their voice to be heard. The right to protest, it is so important that when one person stands on their own, their voice is likely to drown in polity. But when a group of people gather around, their voice is, it is more heard. Unlike when one person simply says, I have this issue. Now, then the difficult question that arises is whether these protests actually sort out the issues that the society is facing. And to a certain extent, one may say, no, it really doesn't sort out these issues, because if it was really a solution, then we wouldn't be seeing such a number of protests in South Africa, or as Professor Jane Duncan categorized South Africa as the protest nation. It really shows that somewhere, somehow, even when people go out in groups and go out in numbers, they can still be ignored. If they are not ignored, then the situation is turned around, and you find in a lot of cases, the focus is more on the violence of the protest as opposed to the cause. And I think that's where we need to change the narrative, where we say, until when are we going to talk about this violence, and actually start focusing what really causes people to protest. And that way, I think, government, if they apply that type of narrative, they may be able to, to listen to the fundamental issues that the people in society are raising. And with this, I'm not saying that people should protest outside the bounds of the Constitution. Protesters also have a responsibility to make sure that when they protest, they do it within the bounds of Section 17 of the Constitution and also guided by the Regulations of Gatherings Act 205 of 1993. That way, we will be able, society will be able to focus more on the issues that give rise to the protest as opposed to focusing on the violence of the protest.
Let's stick with the theme of violence of the protest and maybe look at the police's response. Maybe in particular, I go back to scenes outside Parliament where a number of students were protesting, calling for free education. They were met with tear gas, rubber bullets. Then what guides the police's response to such protests?
You know, we have a problem in the manner in which police respond to protests. And you would note that we have what we call the public order policing, and that is the relevant section or the relevant unit of the SEPs that needs to respond to protests. But there also what we see is that it's either the members are inadequately trained insofar as responding to the protest, and I'm talking about the preparedness of this unit to be able to attend properly and within the confines of the law, respond properly to issues of crowd management. And we also have a lot of issues in South Africa in the manner in which when the police respond to protest, the force and the manner of force that they use. And there's a number of statutes that are very clear in terms of how must force be used during crowd control and what type of force must be used. And we know, if we look at the regulations of the Gatherings Act, it does mention that the force must be appropriate and it must not be lethal. So when we talk about the appropriateness of the force, is that it must have an objective, and that objective, the law does put it clear, that objective should be to disperse the crowd and not to cause injury to the crowd. Because we would note that in the preamble of the Regulations of Gatherings Act, it says that whilst everyone has their right to protest, they also have the right to enjoy the protection of the state. So what it is basically saying is that when police attend to issues of protest or issues of crowd management, their first approach should be ensuring the safety of the participants of the protest as opposed to inflicting injury or inflicting some form of fear to those who are protesting.
Thank you very much for helping us make sense of that. Stanley Malematja is a human rights lawyer.